Good morning. This is Michael Guiette. We will be, excuse me, starting the meeting in just a few minutes. We're waiting for people to join. Thank you. Andy, good morning. This is Michael Guiette. I was wondering, my backup's not here today. Can you hear me okay? I've unmuted your mic, so you should be able to unmute and answer me. Good morning and welcome to the November edition of the Central Command Fall Webinar Series. My name is Michael Guiette and I am here today by myself. So I won't be introducing anyone else. I'm the product manager for Central Command, and today we will be going through the Central Command financial processing, and the presentation will consist of a little bit of introduction first about the process, about the webinar. We will be recording this webinar. Everyone's microphone is on mute right now. We will be monitoring the chat and the questions if you have any questions that come up. So with that, I'm going to start the presentation. We're going to be going through the Central Command financial posting process. This process will, let me back up. upcoming webinars, sorry. January, what's in 7.76? February, maintaining a healthy environment. And then in March, online data access. Don't forget, coming up in December, though, we do have the December 18th webinar. This is going to be a little bit longer, an hour and a half session, preparing for your year end. So we're going to be going through all of the steps needed to get everything ready for the year end, processing the year end, closing out 2024, getting everything ready for 2025. Again, as I said before, my name is Michael Guiette, and I'm going to be going through the XB50 and the financial processing today. What we're going to do here to start this off is I'm going to bring over into the into my screen. Let me grab this and bring it. Where'd it go? Sorry, my apologies. This screen that I'm bringing up will go through. Don't panic about this. This is an overview of the CentralCommand financial processing that takes the travel transactions from the travel tables, validates the information, what is needed to go into the general ledger, accounts payable, accounts receivable. So here where we look at the travel tables are in this blue box here on the left. We have the financial processing module. We have the GL07. This is the batch input. And what that process does, and we're going to go through the setup, we're going to go through the actual processing and show what it does. But what this processing will do is it converts the travel data based on a series of rules and validation, and it posts that travel information into the accounts receivable module, into the accounts payable module where it's required, and then into the general ledger. So as we go through this setup and we go through the types of transactions that get posted, what identifies a transaction to be posted, all of those different things, we're going to work through and show you some of the features of the financial posting module and the types of things that you can do that will allow you to expand the amount of information that you can get from the financial side of the house regarding your travel transactions. So with that, I'm going to switch over to CentralCommand, and give me 1 second here. And I'm going to go into the web application. So I'm logging into CentralCommand here. And in my CentralCommand module, what we see first is we have a module or a section called Financials down here in the center column. And again, this screen may look a little bit different based on the size of your monitor, how you've got it, what types of things you have open here. So when my menu opens and I go to CentralCommand, my center column at the bottom is the financial posting module. This financial posting module is designed to take the travel transactions, the financial data from those travel transactions, work with the accounting setup in the Unit 4 ERP modules, and be able to post that information to those modules so that we can have our accounting team have access to that information. Inside of this module, there are several things that we will do that have to be done to be able to post this information successfully. That information, that setup, is in our fixed registers. We have two different main fixed registers in this financial module that we will be discussing. First is the transaction rule fixed register. This financial transaction rule tells us or tells the system how we want those financial transactions posted. You'll notice here, though, we have two different types of accounts, two main different types of accounts. We have our cost of sales account, we have our sales account. If you're using debit credit accounting, then those two accounts that we're posting in this screen or we're displaying in the screen will be different. They'll be your cost of sales will be your vendor sales information. Your sales account will be your customer sales information. This is where your total sales are going to be registered in the general ledger. The third account here, the suspense account, are for those transactions that are from ARC or BSP. Because we don't want to necessarily treat them as a true accounts payable type of transaction, we use suspense account reconciliation in the financial side of the house, because when we're reconciling ARC or BSP, that's handled in a separate module. We went through that last month, where we went through how we reconcile the ARC and BSP, and we reconcile that process with the suspense account. In this fixed register, you'll also notice that we have this field called Rev Group. Rev Group determines from that vendor transaction, how do we want this information posted to our cost of sales or our sales account. The Rev Group is an actual relation that's set up on the supplier master file. So we'll show this. We'll talk about how this gets set up and what we use to determine to post that off. So this is the primary posting rule, or the posting information that tells the travel transaction which accounts to use. So that's what we're doing first. The second fixed register that I want to talk about here is if you're outside of the United States, you're doing ARC and BSP reconciliation. The tax setup, and I'm in my US client here. If I go over to my Canadian client here, let me show you this real quick. If I go into my CentralCommand in my Canadian client, fixed registers, my tax rate setup here will determine, based on the tax codes within the travel reservation and the tax setup, the tax rate code, and the tax setup within CentralCommand, within the unit or ERP, will determine how your VAT taxes get posted. Now, VAT taxes typically are posted from the agency's accounting perspective. These taxes are the taxes that the agency has to pay based on their revenue that's being received. So we call that tax on commission. So this is your tax on commission setup, and defining how those taxes get posted to the financials, so that at the end of the period, whether it's a monthly period or a quarterly period, and you have to pay your revenue taxes, this is the setup that allows you to post that transaction into the financials real time to be able to track that tax setup. Come back over here to my US client. So now, the second piece that we're going to talk about here, so we've gone in, we've looked at the fixed registers. The fixed registers, like I said, are the way that we set it up to post into our sales and cost of sales. If I look in my accounting module and I go into my accounts payable, supplier information, and I go into my vendor master file, I'm going to just pick Amtrak here. So when I look at Amtrak, a supplier, and I go to their relations, this relation tells me which revenue group that supplier is attached to. Again, the fixed register is going to tell us which cost of sales that transaction gets posted to. Now, if we have a supplier transaction and we're posting it and there's commission that needs to be receipted from that supplier, the subledger postings are handled a little differently. They're not done from the travel fixed register. They're actually done from the master file, from the supplier master file. Or if you're looking at the accounts receivable subledger, we're going to be looking at the customer master file as well. So when we're looking at this vendor master file, the thing that we're going to focus on here is this vendor group. The vendor group determines if we have an accounts receivable posting or accounts payable posting. The vendor group will determine which accounting subledger that we use to post that information to. So when I go into the supplier or customer master file, we go into the vendor group. And here I'm going to look up travel supplier, if I can type. So we're going to go into the travel vendors. And when we look at the travel vendors here again, if I go back over here, I'm looking at my travel vendors, which is group number 2. I'm in my travel vendors group number 2, and this is where we determine where that subledger account is going to be posted. So if we have an Amtrak ticket and we're going to be receiving commission from Amtrak, the CentralCommand financial posting looks up that supplier ID, looks up the group it's attached to, and will post the open receivable to the supplier subledger so that we know that we're expecting that commission from that transaction. Now, when we're posting those financial transactions into these different accounts, those accounts have specific information that we are going to use that has to be present when we're posting to the financials. So if we look at the common module, in the common module, when we look at our chart of accounts, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to stay with my accounts payable side of the house for a moment. So when I load the accounts payable accounts, this is my 2105 account, you'll see that I have a basic account rule assigned to that financial account. When I look at this rule, I like the row, go to the rule. When I look at this account rule will determine what information has to be part of that financial posting. So when we look at the basic account rule, in this case, they want to have the account, the branch ID. In this case, we might have the customer that we want to assign and make it mandatory. We might have other pieces of information that we want to have posted to the financials from the travel module. What we have here, we have 7 categories of information where we have identified the branch, the customer. Here we could have the agent information, right? Or we could have other attributes that could be posted from the financials. So it does determine, based on our attributes, what category of information they can be posted into. So these account rules are used in conjunction with the travel financial posting that will allow us to ensure that when we're doing our reporting out of our financial side of the house, if we're posting to the accounts receivable subledger, accounts payable subledger, if we're posting into our general ledger accounts, those account rules will determine what pieces of information have to be collected from the travel module to be put into the financial posting. So once we've got that information set up, once we have your suppliers, your customers, the supplier group, the customer group, the revenue groups attached to suppliers, the account rules on your travel accounts that we're posting to, all of that information comes into play when we're setting up the CentralCommand financial posting. Now, the financial posting, what this server process will do is it looks at our travel transactions. In the travel transaction, when we go into the transaction inquiry, I'm just gonna grab something from 2022 here, because this is my demo environment. So I'm going to go 103, and I'm going to load this information. Okay, so when I look at a travel transaction, that travel transaction is going to have financial information on it. That financial information in the Invoice Items tab is what we will be using when we're posting to that financial transaction, to that financial. If we're looking at this, the total amount paid, we're looking at if there's a commission amount, if there is any amount information, we're going to be using that to post to the financial transaction. If we look at the transaction rule, we may be posting into those 7 categories of information. We're going to have the customer ID. We could be posting an IATA number. We could be posting the customer number here. We could be posting any of this agent information. Again, based on the posting rules on the financial side of the house. All of that information will come into play. Now, CentralCommand has on the invoice items row, on every invoice items row, it has a flag. It's not displayed on this screen. It's called the trigger flag. Every time a new transaction comes into CentralCommand, the trigger flag is set to 1. That trigger flag determines whether or not the CentralCommand financial processing will be looking at that transaction, picking it up to post to the financials. So when that trigger flag is set to 1 and the financial process runs, CentralCommand will expect, or it will consume that information from the invoice items and the surrounding P&R data. It'll pull it into the financial processing. So we're going to come down here under inquiries. We're going to go into document financial inquiry. I'm going to take this date out and I'm going to search here. So when you run that financial processing and the process sees the trigger flag set to 1, it will pick up that information. And here you can see this is the travel transaction. Sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing there. Go back to financial processing. One thing I just did, and it's important to point this out, when we're using the web screens, when we're using the web to access the information, this blue link will actually take me to the attribute master file screen. Now, when I clicked on that, it didn't populate anything here because the transaction's not actually an attribute value that we would be picking up. But when I closed the screen, it made me go back to the menu, go open the screen again. At the top of this screen, this is just a little bit of web logic, right? At the top of the screen, we have these breadcrumbs to get back to that financial document inquiry. I click on the breadcrumb, it will take me back to that screen. So just be aware that when you're on a screen and you zoom through it to something else, that you would need the breadcrumbs here to take us back to this original screen. Now, I want to point something out here on this document financial inquiry. All of these travel transactions have been picked up from the travel module because the trigger flag was set to 1, and the system, that server process, interrogated the vendor master file, the customer master file, our transaction rules fixed register, and it said, looking at this travel transaction, looking at the vendor number, looking at the customer number, I found errors. And the error says I have an invalid vendor on this transaction number. Transaction not completely valid. Obviously, it's not completely valid because I have an invalid vendor number. So what that means is when I see the error text, it means that these transactions have not yet been posted to the financials because if the vendor is not valid or the maybe it got closed for some reason, if that vendor is not valid, I have to go into the travel transaction, update the vendor ID. If the transaction is not completely valid, it could be a number of things that we want to look at here. We could be looking at the rev group was not set up correctly on the supplier master file. It could be that the transaction rule that we were looking at in that fixed register didn't have a V-sale, vendor sale, for that supplier ID. So there are a number of reasons why this information may or may not be valid to send that travel transaction to that screen. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to look at this 23052, right? And let's see here. Sorry, hit it again. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to say 230572. I'm going to tab into this transaction. It'll take me to my, here if I look at my transaction screen, you can see that this information is showing me that transaction. Here, you see that I've got the vendor number here. So depending on whether or not this vendor number is active, if it has a revenue group on it, if it is all of the information is set up correctly, this is what determines whether or not something is going to get posted to the financials. Okay, so those are the things that, you know, when we have our system set up correctly and that information gets posted or gets collected and we can see it go through, we come back over to this financial module again, and we go into the document financial history inquiry. The history inquiry when I search the history inquiry will give me the list of all of the transactions that got successfully posted to the financials. Now, there are a couple of fields that I do want to point out here. When you look at this, this is all travel information at the beginning. This is our base amount, our equivalent amount, our tax amount, penalty, commission amount. All of this is travel information, our P&R locator, our GDS invoice number. But if I scroll out to the right, this first tells me the form of payment. The form of payment will determine how things are posted to the ERP financials. If it's a credit card transaction, form of payment is CC. We know that on a central command travel transaction, if the form of payment is credit card, there's going to be no accounts receivable or accounts payable submitted to the subledger unless there's commission due from the supplier. Okay, so the only reason that we would see something posted to the subledger for that transaction is if there was commission due from that supplier. In this case, I want to point out that the rule here. This is the rule from the travel transactions financial posting fixed register. The A sale tells me this is an ARC or BSP sale. A V sale shows me that's a vendor sale. So a vendor sale with a form of payment of accounts receivable is going to show an amount due from the customer on the AR subledger. It's going to show an amount to be paid to the supplier on the supplier subledger. It's also going to post the sales and the cost of sales information into the general ledger accounts based on that setup that we've done within the ERP financial module, as well as the travel financial postings fixed registers. Next, if I scroll out a little more to the right, what you'll see here, again, this is still more travel information. This is our vendor number, our carrier codes, carrier numbers, all of that information. But if I come out, the field that I want to point out here is the voucher number. The voucher number is the general ledger transaction number. So if we went into the general ledger side of the house, the financial side of the house, and we pulled up a transaction number, using this transaction number, this is going to show us exactly how that financial transaction or this travel transaction hit the financials. So we will be able to go into, so if I look at this 70041122, and I go into my accounting module, and I go into inquiries, general ledger transaction, and I pull up my transaction number here is going to be 70021122, and I search. Make sure I got that number right. 7004, my bad, sorry. 7004 1122, and I search on that transaction. What you'll see here is based on the posting rules, this is where we're going to be able to see, and I'm going to click on this transaction from here. This will open the general ledger posting screen. So this will show us what that information was. So our category 3 was the agent information. We've got the account number, right? This was our subledger account. This 2108 is our accounts receivable. Then we've got our 4,000 and 5,000. That's our sales and cost of sales accounts. So we're able to see this information. In this case, if there was no commission on it, we're not seeing anything for the accounts payable subledger because we're not due to get anything back from the supplier on that transaction. So this allows us to tie. So when we look at this document financial history, this is the screen that allows us to tie any of the financial transactions from the general ledger, the ERP financial side of the house, back to the travel transaction in the Central Command travel module. This is that one bridging table when you want to be able to do an inquiry on the financial transaction and you want to pull in travel information. Let's say I want to go in and I'm doing a financial inquiry screen and I want to pull up the city routing from that travel transaction. I can use my expand base to expand to this document financial history, looking up the voucher number from the financial side, tying it back to the transaction number on the travel side, be able to go look at that document row in the travel transaction, be able to pull out the city routing if I wanted to. So by having all of the information set up correctly, I've got my supplier and vendor master files. I've got the rev groups associated on those. I've got the transaction posting rule that tells me what information has to be included in this general ledger transaction posting. The all of that information is used by, we call it the XB50 financial processing. Now that processing will collect the data from the travel side. It will first put it into this document financial inquiry table. This is where the validation happens, okay? Validation means that it's looking up my vendor number. It's on the financial side. It's looking up my customer number. It's looking up that account rule. All of that information happens here. Once it's validated here, the XB50 process will put this into the financial ACR batch input table. The batch input table requires a balanced 2-0 posting to be put into the ACR batch input. So when it runs the GL07, the financial processing, that's what then validates that transaction against the posting rules in the travel side of the house. So all of that information comes together, and when we have something that is stopped on this screen, we're going to see that we get a batch ID on this transaction. So if I come into back to my central command, if that data that's sitting there is waiting to be posted, I come back to the travel transaction, I make my changes, or I'm updating those transactions, I can do two things. One, I can come into the batch maintenance screen. The batch maintenance screen here, if I choose a batch ID, it will show me all of the transactions that are waiting in this batch to be posted, right? So all of this, when we looked at that document financial history inquiry, this screen will display the information based on those transactions that are stopped, and it will show me all of the rows that are waiting to be posted. Now here, where I've got this error column, if I say checked and I filter on just the checked rows, the checked error, meaning that this transaction, these transactions, all of these different rows in this batch have an error on it. So our goal would be to make sure that we get everything posted. We're not running the errors. Now, once I have this ready to go, I'm going to copy my batch here. I'm going to come back over to my financial module, and in my screen here, I'm going to say batch input transactions for Central Command. This is that GL07. This is that financial processing piece that's working from that ACR batch input. In this case, I'm going to paste in the batch ID. I'm going to have my period that I'm going to post it. This is telling me I'm going to post it. When I save this, this will then rerun the financial posting, the GL07, on those travel transactions that were sitting there in error. Now, when I run it, it'll give me an order number, and I can come down to my ordered reports, and I can look it up to see that it is, if it's waiting, it's, let's see here. Just looking to see, and you can see that if I go into, sorry, I didn't want to go into the log itself. I want to go back here, and I want to post this, or I want to open this screen up. This screen, when I'm opening this, I can view this error report. You can see that this one transaction had an error, and it's telling me, what my issues are here. Okay, if I scroll out to the right, it will say my category 1 is invalid, my category 2 was invalid. So based on my account rule in the financial side, it's saying, hey, wait a minute, you have to have a customer ID. You have to have a branch ID. If that information is not here, then this report will show us what's missing. What do I need to go correct on this transaction? If I come over to my valid postings, all of these other postings are ready to go. They're just waiting on that one, because that one transaction is still part of a batch. We need to be able to correct that one, and then we can go in and have it posted. The other thing that we could do is, if we have this voucher number, let's go copy that, come back over to my batch input maintenance. And batch, what's that? Sorry, my bad. Let me close that. I chose just this one batch here. So if I come back over to my batch input maintenance, and just looking at why that wasn't. Okay. I'm going to rerun this one, because that's the one I meant to run here. And I wanted to show you this report once it is finished here. So here, this one is running. I'm going to refresh that again. It'll take a few minutes here. But again, this is going to be the same thing. We're going to be able to look at this, see what the errors are on that error report, determine what do we need to do. Do we need to go correct the travel transaction? Do we need to remove it out of the batch, let everything else post? If there was only one transaction, I might make a note of that transaction, remove it from my batch, let the rest of the batch post correctly, and then go back and fix that one transaction. So there are a number of ways that we would go about making that happen, so that we could see then what our issue is. So here, you can see here that whole batch that I just reran, again, it failed. Most of it failed. Were there any transactions? Yeah, there were a few. So I'm going to spend more time correcting those transactions that are on this error report, looking at the error messages on that financial inquiry table. Okay, so if you need some help understanding a little bit more about, we're not going to get into a big training today, but if you need some more help getting into the how would we go about correcting travel transactions so that we can get them posted, we can do that at a later time. You can reach out to our team to help you with that posting. Now, the one thing I did want to go into, we've got about just a couple of minutes, but I want to point out a couple of things here. When we're looking at this financial posting, if we're in the travel module and we hit our question mark up here, our help file, I want to go into the help file real quick because I want to point out, this is the last thing, I want to point out that in the financials help file, you have a lot of information about this financial processing. It will walk you through what can be posted, how things need to be set up, what do you need to do. There's a lot of information here. But the final thing I do want to point out is down here at the bottom, all of these CentralCommand travel posting attributes. So if you want to be able to excuse me, if you want to be able to post things from the travel transaction, this is our customer ID, our supplier ID, the project ID if you're using B0, the branch ID, which we call cost center here. Here, if you got any product ID, you got P&R locators, all of these are different posting attributes that can be used in those 7 categories of information so that you can use other financial tools within the ERP financials based on travel data that you can post. The last and final thing, I promise, is that when we have, and we haven't gone into, I don't think we've done a session on data mapping, the interface, the process around data mapping, but when you're mapping a data element from a P&R remark into a reportable field, those can also be used as posting elements. So let's say that you've got a trip ID in a UDIT 81. When you set up that UDIT 81 as a posting element, then the data mapping happens during the interface process, the parser process. It puts it into whatever field you put it into the TUD P&R data table. The financial process will recognize that UDIT element that you set up if you tell it it's a posting element. So you can then capture that information and send it over to the financials as well. Don't be scared. Don't be afraid to go into the financials help. Look at the financial processing. There's an overview of what the process does. It talks about the GL analysis. It talks about, AR roll up. When you're doing accounts receivable, when you have multiple AR items on an invoice, do you want it rolled up to one value, or do you want to show the detail on each individual accounting line? So with that, what I'd like to do is I'm going to open this. I'm going to go in, and again, if those of you who joined a little late, I just want to say I've been alone today, and so Bailey's on a cruise ship somewhere in the Caribbean. So I am happy to answer any questions that you have right now. And oh, I'm sorry. It said 10:30? I thought it was 10 o'clock. My apologies. I'm looking at Trish. Thank you for putting that in. I thought we were scheduled at 10 o'clock. So I have recorded this session if you want to review it at your leisure. So I, again, apologize because I was alone today and I may have gotten ahead of my own schedule. So with that, I'm going to open it up to some questions to determine if I can answer any questions first, but again, I apologize, everyone. I might have jumped the gun today. This is why they don't let me in charge of these things. Please let me know if you have any questions of some of the things that we've gone over today. I will get back to the financial postings. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to post this recording immediately following the webinar, so you will be able to watch it from the beginning. Again, I apologize if we are a little early today, and I'm sorry, I'm just lost because I just started early. I apologize for any miscommunication today, and again, it was my fault. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you have any questions after you review the recording, please let me know, and I will follow up and amend the recording if required. I do want to thank everyone for joining and apologize for the challenges with the meeting today. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining. Please review the recording. Let me know if you have any questions, and we will respond immediately. All right. Thank you very much.